In this week's episode, Cherie Price, who's president of the Illinois Diversity Council, and I will chat about divorcing employees receiving support at work, the State Department addressing accessibility issues, and much more. Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I've found is that there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world, and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for DEI stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these inclusive actions and policies within your own organization to help you build a more inclusive world. Cherie, hello. Thank you for joining us. Will you please introduce yourself?
Thanks for having me, Bernadette. I am Cherie Price. I am the Advisory Board Council President of the Illinois Diversity Council, one of more than 30 around the country that are under the umbrella of the National Diversity Council. We celebrated our 10th anniversary last year, so we're going into our 11th year this year, and I've gratefully been a part of the council since its origination. And so I'm a long hauler. In addition to my role specifically in DNI as the council president, I have a long time career in healthcare management, and so pleased at the recent opportunity to contribute to our health equity, to advance health equity for those most impacted communities.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad to have you here today, and you bring such a wealth of expertise and experience to this conversation. So, you know what? The first thing I just wanted to talk to you about, Cherie, is, it's been a tough few weeks. We just, had the killing of Tyree Nichols. I mean, there's a lot of terrible stuff happening in the world, right? And do you really feel like it's possible to find good vibes in DEI when there are so many examples of oppression?
There is absolutely the opportunity to find good vibes. Actually, it's an imperative. It's kind of a no-brainer. We must, as champions that are cascading change in this space. And I kind of, when in thinking of this space, I kind of attribute it to the analogy of maybe someone that's embarking upon treatment plan for, an illness like cancer. You have to have a positive attitude. Like that's the first prognosis from the healthcare provider, So it's the same rule of thumb for us as champions of change in the D&I space as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and that's why I do what I do, because I just feel like we have to look for the light.
Yes.
And there are a lot of us who are motivated by building on what's going right, as opposed to, there's room for all of it. I mean, obviously we have to talk about what's going wrong, but I also think it's important to look for the light. So speaking of that, what's giving you hope these days as it relates to DEI?
Hope is out there like fresh air. So what gives me hope is empowered and inspiring change agents. Authentic allyship is another hope check in the box. Heightened expectations in this space. Transparency, whether it's intended to be front and center, it is front and center. And then the undeniable accountability. So whether someone is doing it willingly, the accountability is there. And I think in lieu of this, the murder of Tyree, we saw swift action by those in power, and so that's just an example of that. But those are my hopeful nuggets that I really cling to.
Well, that's a lot. So thank you. And I'm really glad that you're in a position to keep spreading hope in the work that you do. I mean, you have a broad reach in your work with the ILDC, and I know your programming serves a whole lot of folks here in the Chicagoland and Illinois area. So thank you for putting all of those good vibes and best practices out into the world with that work.
Yes.
All right, so let's get to today's episode. So I'm going to first start with a story from last week, which is the first good vibe. So I was at a law firm to do an event, and I was getting mic'd up to speak. And as I was putting on my own mic, because I know how to do these things, right? The tech said, "She's a pro at this." And then, like, seconds later, turned to me and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to gender you." And my response was, no worries. You guessed right. Thank you. But honestly, I just thought it was so remarkable. And I actually talked to the group about it because we're not quite there where this is like happening all the time, and sharing of pronouns and correcting mistaken assumptions is part of everyday work life. And so I just thought it was a really great example of someone being an ally and someone correcting themselves, but none of it was a big deal. It was all a super quick experience. So big props to the AV tech at Jenner and Block in Chicago, for being the first good vibe from this week. Cherie, what's been your experience with this? What do you think about this?
I think this was a really good example of sometimes how what I call SMEs, subject matter experts, can sometimes skew perceptions of, a culture, whether they got it all together, whether or not they're kind of early adopters. But I believe that when a culture is normalized by a novice, it's a real thing. I think that is really a representation, regardless of how high in the org chart you have someone that's trying to articulate how far the organization has come or where they are in the journey. But when a novice can really just show up and really display the true and authentic culture of the organization, I think that's a real thing. And I think that is a true identification of where that organization is.
I absolutely agree. I mean, this was essentially a frontline employee. A
Yeah.
lot of times, folks like that aren't even invited to diversity trainings, right?
Absolutely. So if it's integrated and disseminated down a little further in the org chart to that individual, I think that is a good representation. That is probably what's holistically happening.
Absolutely. And you know what? And I just love that it was just a small action, and that acts of inclusion and acts that create a sense of belonging, they don't have to be this big thing. They
Absolutely.
can just be simple.
Right.
And so anyway, I love that story. But the next good vibe comes from Bank of America, which really is doing a lot of things right. Last year, they raised their minimum wage to $23 an hour versus the federal minimum of $7.25. They just promoted a whole bunch of folks into managing director positions, and more than half are women and BIPOC folks.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, they expanded maternity and paternity benefits from 12 weeks to 16. I mean, they're just doing a whole lot of great stuff, Bank of America.
Yeah. I was really, I was doing the happy dance when I read that. I feel that Bank of America is creating a blueprint for equity that exceeds something that's being mandated. I think equity is best applied when the wisdom comes within, rather than someone telling you to do it. That is just the right thing to do, and you take the initiative to execute that.
Absolutely. I think that's perfectly and very succinctly said.
Yeah.
And this really matters because we know that frontline employees are historically underpaid and undervalued, and they're also disproportionately BIPOC,
Yes.
right? So they're more likely to experience the racial wealth gap. And
Yeah.
also, they're also not represented well in high levels of organizations. And with over half of their managing partners, I mean, that's a pretty big deal in this recent
It is.
promotion round.
That's huge. That's huge.
All right. So the next story comes from the US State Department, which is changing its standard font to improve accessibility for folks who are blind or visually impaired, which is about 13% of Americans. So this means that the State Department is changing from Times New Roman, which is a serif font, and switching to Calibri, a sans serif font, which makes it a little bit easier for screen readers to read. These are the types of things I don't even think about, Cherie, because I don't have this experience, right?
Yeah, that was a light bulb moment, and it's just the indication to your point about the first story about just the little things. It's all relevant, right? It's all relevant, and when organizations, especially our government, makes these type of decisions, all stakeholders should be in scope. And I'm reminded of in my healthcare role, how these IT developers, their job is to always create these new and improved applications. But one thing I always find is that they build it first and then step back and ask the users, well, how do we do? Well, you missed the mark. And I think that this is a really good example of getting in front of what the end user needed and addressing that.
Absolutely. It's always better to be proactive, right?
Yes, yes,
But my goodness, I mean, this has been knowledge, I guess, for 20 years, and I didn't know about it. So there are just so many ways to be inclusive.
absolutely.
All right, the next story is about a new program from the US government called the Welcome Corps, which is inspired by programs in Australia and Canada. It's a new refugee resettlement program where Americans in groups of 5 can privately sponsor refugees by raising some money, helping the refugees find schools, affordable housing, jobs, and so forth. This is, I think, fantastic.
I think that the word that resonated with me with this particular story is the word community. I could envision. I know we're past that era, but like women had Tupperware parties. When I have a sponsorship party, or the faith-based organizations, or even I could even envision like Girl Scouts or any type of organized group, or even what an inspiration to bring a group of folks together, a book club or a wine tasting club. I think it
Hmm.
was an absolute awesome expression of community. I did have a caveat to add to that. I felt like it was a good blueprint for us to address some of the homelessness that we experience in our city. I'm a big news watcher, and I saw a report this weekend that a grade school in my community where I grew up, actually my grade school in this school was Rivals. Wadsworth is going to be opening up its doors to 250 immigrants to house them. And I was like, what a wonderful idea. And certainly, the two stories have some similarities, but I think that anything that we do for in that space for immigrants, people that are coming to our homelands, we can do for the ones that are underserved that are already here as well.
Excellent point. Yes. And there certainly is a lot of that in Chicago and,
Yeah.
unfortunately all over. So, yes, thank you for that caveat because there's a lot of work to do
Yeah, I
indeed.
think the news report story said that homelessness has increased from 25 to 33%.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
heartbreaking.
yeah.
Absolutely heartbreaking. All right. Well, the last story is about a pledge from UK businesses to support divorcing employees. A study showed that 74% of these employees report feeling less efficient, and over 90% feel that their work performance and mental health suffered as a result of the divorce. So the campaign is recommending that companies recognize separation as a life event in HR policy so that support services and counseling are formally available, and that they actively publicize that policy and commit to flexible work arrangements.
This one resonated really personally with me because I too am a divorcee, and so I had this experience. And when I was in that season, I had to advocate for myself with confidence that I was entitled to those considerations, but also with a certain amount of uncertainty because I didn't know what the outcome or the backlash was going to be, whether or not, someone, I was already having challenges with my direct report manager, and I didn't know if that was going to be used as justification, to reflect upon my performance. But I can remember just saying, hey, I'm good for it. I've earned it, and I just need some grace. And I think to be able to have a formalized policy and procedure in place to support individuals, I think is just a compliment to the whole mental wellness conversation. So this one gets my vote, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm also a divorced person, and it was really hard for me as well. And I'm self-employed, and I was self-employed then, and it was really hard, So I'm a big fan. So hopefully we start to see some organizations here in the US taking on this type of policy as well.
Absolutely. I think that really intrigued me. That may be something I might dive into as a talking point for the ILDC to
There you
expand
go.
the conversation. Yeah.
Well, if the organizations in the US start to implement this policy, you can bet I will talk about it here in
Yes.
5 things in 15 minutes. So thank you so much for joining me today, Cherie. How can folks find you if you want to share your contact
I have a
information?
strong presence on LinkedIn. So just by name, Cherie Price, you can find me there. You can go to the Illinois Diversity Council webpage and you can find me there. And if you want to send me a direct email, it's ildcpresident@nationaldiversitycouncil.org.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And folks, if you don't already subscribe to the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to 5 Things in 15 Minutes. I hope you found yourself inspired by at least one of this week's stories. If you did, would you mind sharing it with a colleague and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform? And if you don't already get my 5 Things newsletter, join at 5thingsdei.com. I'm Bernadette Smith, and I'll see you next week right here for 5 Things in 15 Minutes, bringing good vibes to DEI.